When we think of dangerous criminals, we imagine cold, calculating adults. But what if terror comes from someone so young who barely left childhood behind? A 10-year-old girl crying in court, accused of a brutal crime. A teenager who takes off his shirt before the judge and reveals the word killer printed on his chest. Stories like these are not fiction, they happened. And they reveal something frightening. Evil sometimes does not wait for age to arrive. In this video, you will learn the case of a child who put an entire prison on alert. A young man who went down in history as one of the most feared behind bars. From the crime that shocked his community to the disturbing way he behaved in court. Get ready. This is one of those stories that stick in the head and give chills just remembering. We begin speaking of Eric Smith, the teenager of ordinary appearance who, at 13 years old, committed an act so cruel it left deep marks on all American society. The setting of this tragedy was the quiet town of Savona, located in the state of New York. A place known for tranquility, where neighbors greet each other on the street and serious crimes are rare. But in August 1993, that calm was completely destroyed by a brutal event no one would ever imagine, especially coming from someone so young. On the morning of August 2nd, little Derek Roby, a cheerful 4-year-old boy, left home excited for another day at his summer camp. It was a safe and common routine for him, something his parents trusted to be harmless. However, along the way, he crossed paths with Eric Smith, a red-haired boy, with glasses and a fragile look, who many knew for being constantly bullied and living isolated from other children. Eric offered Derek a shortcut through the woods, a suggestion that seemed harmless coming from another kid. But that walk quickly turned into a trap with no way out. Inside the forest, what unfolded was true horror. Eric attacked little Derek violently, first strangled him until he lost consciousness, then brutally assaulted him using a heavy rock, causing lethal injuries. As if that were not enough, he went even further, dumping the contents of the child's lunchbox over the wounds, in an act of extreme cruelty that left even the most experienced investigators in shock. The brutality of the scene showed not only anger but a deep psychological disturbance. Meanwhile, across town, Derek's mother, Robin, began to feel something was wrong. Time passed and her son did not arrive at camp. Restlessness gave way to despair, and soon the searches began. Friends, neighbors, police, and volunteers joined in a desperate task force to find the boy. A few hours later, Derek's lifeless body was found in the woods, starting a wave of commotion that reached not only the city but the entire country. The crime was so barbaric that residents, accustomed to peace, began to live in fear of even leaving home. However, the greatest shock came a few days later, when the perpetrator of the crime revealed himself. Eric Smith, the teenager until then considered just another among many, spontaneously confessed to committing the murder. The news spread quickly, and no one could understand how a 13-year-old boy could be capable of something so monstrous. Despite his young age, Eric was formally charged with second-degree murder and brought to trial as if he were an adult, a decision that divided opinions and sparked heated discussions about criminal responsibility in youth. During the process, his defense alleged that Eric had been a constant victim of verbal abuse, social rejection, and frequent episodes of humiliation by classmates. They tried to show that this history of suffering had fueled a repressed anger, which ended up being explosively directed against Derek. However, for the jury, this was not enough to justify the cruelty of the crime. The gravity of the murder weighed more than any emotional explanation. In 1994, Eric Smith was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum period of 9 years before he could request parole. Even being one of the youngest to receive such a severe sentence in the state of New York, society felt the punishment was necessary, given the brutality of the acts. Over nearly 30 years, Eric remained imprisoned, trying to rebuild his image. He participated in rehabilitation programs, sought to show remorse in hearings, and applied several times for the right to return to society. Even so, all his attempts for freedom were denied, until in 2021, after a series of analyses and psychiatric evaluations, the system granted him parole. The decision once again divided public opinion. On one side, those who believe in human capacity for change. On the other, those who consider it inadmissible to forgive someone capable of taking a child's life so cruelly. Another case that deeply shook an entire community, and left scars that last to this day, was that of Joshua Phillips, an ordinary teenager, with an innocent face, who kept a secret so dark that even the most experienced police officers were left speechless. What seemed to be just another tragic disappearance would turn into one of the most shocking crimes in Jacksonville, Florida's history. It was November 3, 1998. Maddie Clifton, an 8-year-old girl, was happily playing near her home, as she had on so many other afternoons. The sun was still high when her mother, noticing her daughter had not returned, began looking for her. The clock advanced, and the absence of any sign of the child quickly generated panic. The city mobilized. Search teams formed by neighbors, volunteers, and even local teenagers began scouring every corner of the neighborhood. Among those who appeared worried was Joshua Phillips, 14 years old, a boy who, outwardly, seemed committed to finding Maddie, but inside, hid something terrible. For 7 entire days, the girl's whereabouts remained a mystery. Until, on November 10th, something extremely disturbing was discovered inside Joshua's own home. His mother, bothered by a damp, persistent stain on the carpet of her son's room, decided to investigate. When moving his bed, she found something no one would ever expect: the lifeless body of Maddie Clifton. She had been there all along, in the same room where Joshua slept peacefully night after night. Immediately, police were called and Joshua was detained. Before investigators, he revealed what had happened. According to his account, it all began with what he called an accident. He and Maddie were playing when, during an improvised baseball game, the ball hit her eye. Scared and crying, Maddie threatened to tell Joshua's father. Afraid of severe punishment, since his father was known to be extremely strict, the boy panicked. In a desperate impulse, he used the bat to try to silence the girl. But when he realized she was still alive, he went for an even crueler action, grabbed a knife and stabbed her repeatedly, in an attempt to cover up his mistake for good. Not satisfied with committing the crime, Joshua hid the body under his bed and spent the following days acting normally. To mask the growing odor of decomposition, he even used air fresheners. He dined with his family, laughed with friends, and even joined the searches. No one suspected the monster was so close, and sleeping beside his own victim. Despite his age, the crime committed by Joshua was considered so brutal that he was tried as an adult. The court did not accept any justification based on fear or emotional immaturity. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no chance of parole. At only 15, he became one of Florida's youngest inmates to receive this type of sentence. Today, at 40, Joshua still serves his sentence at Cross City Penitentiary. His case became a symbol of how despair, when combined with lack of emotional control and domestic fear, can result in irreversible acts. What was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon turned into a tragic story that will never be forgotten. If you think you have seen it all, get ready. Because another terrifying case was Beaver Brothers. 2 young men who turned their own home into a true extermination field. What happened that night in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, is so brutal many prefer not to speak of it. But the truth must be told. On July 22, 2015, Robert Beaver, 18 years old, and his younger brother Michael, 16, put into practice a plan they had been preparing for months. Obsessed with fame and wanting to go down in history as mass killers, the two planned every detail coldly. They did not just want to kill. They wanted to be remembered, to become a Wikipedia entry, to be listed alongside names like Charles Manson and other infamous criminals. For weeks, the brothers gathered knives, developed strategies, and built a true arsenal. The original plan was to kill at least 50 people, but before leaving home to spread terror, they decided to start with their own family. The violence began cowardly. Michael called one of his sisters with the excuse of showing her something on the internet. When she entered the room, she was surprised by Robert, who brutally attacked her from behind. He cut her throat and stabbed her several times. Miraculously, she survived. But the horror was only beginning. The next victim was the mother, April, who received 48 stab wounds until her life was taken. The father, David, tried to react, fought with all his strength, but ended up being struck with a heavy object and stabbed 28 times. Christopher, the little brother of only 7 years, was killed with 6 stabs. Victoria, the 18-year-old sister, was stabbed 18 times while desperately trying to escape. The massacre was so fast and cruel that neighbors barely had time to realize what was happening. Amid that horrific scene, a single moment of hope arose. Daniel, only 12 years old, managed to lock himself inside one of the rooms and, with cold blood, called the emergency number. While police traced the call, Michael tried to trick his brother by pretending to be one of the victims, asking him to open the door. When Daniel opened, he was stabbed 9 times. But even gravely wounded, his call allowed police to arrive in time. The brothers fled to a nearby forest but were captured a few hours later with the help of tracking dogs and tactical teams. When interrogated, it became clear that it had not been an outburst, much less a fit of rage. It was a calculated massacre, fueled by vanity and desire for recognition. Robert was sentenced to life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. Michael, for being underage, received a life sentence with possibility of review, but the chances that one day he will return to society are minimal. This case left not only a city in shock, but also served as a dark warning of how far the minds of young people influenced by distorted ideas of fame can go. And if you are enjoying the video, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel to receive more interesting videos like this. We continue with Heavenly Arroyo. An almost angelic name, but one that ended marked by one of the most brutal and cold crimes the city of Fall River, Massachusetts, has ever witnessed. The most disturbing part? It was not just the murder itself, but the total absence of remorse. It all happened on October 6, 2019. Heavenly, only 15 years old, lived with her great-grandfather and his partner, Shauna Vasquez Rodriguez, 68 years old. The relationship between them was unstable, with constant clashes at home. But that day, one detail triggered something terrible. Heavenly's great-grandfather had traveled to New York and, due to mechanical problems, could not return. That seems to have been the last straw. Alone with Shauna and feeding a growing rage, Heavenly decided to act, and mercilessly. During the night, while Shauna slept, the teenager grabbed a knife and attacked her savagely. There were 70 stabs, a number that by itself reveals the hatred and intensity of the violence. The scariest part? In the next room, Shauna's grandson played video games, completely unaware of the massacre happening just a few feet away. After the crime, instead of panic or guilt, Heavenly acted with absolute coldness. She calmly showered, changed clothes, and tried to eliminate every trace. She threw the bloody clothes in the trash and, when confronted, invented an unbelievable story. She claimed a man in a suit had broken into the house and killed Shauna. But the Fall River Housing Authority security cameras left no doubt. They recorded Arroyo discarding her belongings and dismantled her entire farce. The coldness continued in court. When she appeared before the judge, there were no tears, no anguish, only empty stares, a mocking smirk and careless gestures. She ran her hand through her hair, stared at those present with indifference, and acted as if it were all just a minor detail in life. The impact was immediate. The judge, the lawyers, and especially the victim's family were horrified by her complete lack of empathy. In 2023, already 18, Arroyo pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Even with the seriousness of the crime, she received the possibility of parole. Judge Renee Dupuis sentenced her to life imprisonment, but with a chance of review after 19 years. Yes, there is a possibility, however remote, that Heavenly may one day return to society. Now this is one of those cases that seem like a movie script, but unfortunately, it is real. Sierra Hulseth. Only 16 years old, she did, with the help of her boyfriend, Aaron Guerrero, 18, went much further. What happened in that Nevada home was a meticulous, premeditated, and cruel murder. And the scariest part, it was committed against her own father. Sierra and Aaron had been together only a few months, but lived an intense, almost obsessive relationship. They wanted to run away to Los Angeles and start a new life. But their parents, noticing the couple's increasingly unstable behavior, decided to intervene. They forbade any contact between them. And that was when everything went wrong. Teenage love turned into fuel for hatred. And the two began plotting the unthinkable, the death of Sierra's father, Daniel Hulseth. On the night of April 8, 2021, with calculated coldness, they carried out the plan. Armed with a circular saw, extra blades, lighter fluid, bleach, gloves, and even a tarp, the couple entered Daniel's house. The attack was brutal. Daniel was stabbed more than 70 times. Yes, 70 times, in the head, neck, and torso. Next, the youngsters placed the body in a sleeping bag, set it on fire, and tried to erase the evidence. But the damage was already done. When firefighters arrived, the body was unrecognizable. You think it stopped there? No. What came next was even more disturbing. Hours after the crime, Sierra and Aaron recorded a video. Yes, a video. In it, Aaron appears smiling and says, "Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today is the third day after the murder." Meanwhile, Sierra laughs in the background. No sign of remorse. No tears. Just two teenagers mocking the death of a father, as if it were part of an online challenge. The escape attempt was short. Days later, they were found in Salt Lake City, Utah, and arrested immediately. In 2022, facing indisputable evidence, the two pleaded guilty to murder, arson, and robbery. The sentence was harsh, life imprisonment, with at least 22 years before any chance of release. During the trial, Sierra remained impassive. She did not cry, did not apologize, showed no sign of remorse. Aaron, at least, expressed an apology, though it was far too late. Now, what makes a 15-year-old girl try to kill her own family? The answer, in this case, is a whirlwind of trauma, emotional disorders, and manipulation so deep it turned a vulnerable teenager into the author of an almost fatal crime. Roxana Sikorski was born in Poland and had a difficult childhood. After experiencing traumatic situations when still small, she was adopted by an American family. But even with the new life, the marks of the past remained present. Roxana was diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, a rare condition that affects the ability to trust and bond emotionally with others. This left her extremely susceptible to the influence of dominant figures, and that was how Michael Rivera entered her life. Michael was 23 years old, Roxana, only 15. And even with this striking age difference, he not only became involved with her, but also took full control of her mind. Rivera isolated her from family, brainwashed her, and fed the idea that her parents and sister were enemies, obstacles between the two. The plan, according to him, was simple: eliminate the problem. Literally. On the night of October 17, 2014, the unthinkable happened. While everyone slept, Roxana grabbed a fillet knife and went to her sister's room. In a silent and brutal attack, she cut her throat. But before she could finish, the desperate screams woke the parents, who ran to help their daughter. Roxana fled through the window and ran straight into Rivera's arms, as if he were her safe harbor, and not the mentor of the tragedy. But the hiding lasted little. The two were located in Detroit's South area and arrested. Investigations revealed something even more disturbing. Michael Rivera had sent messages with step-by-step instructions on how Roxana should act. The mind behind the crime was exposed, but the execution, even flawed, was undeniably cruel. Despite her age, Roxana was tried as an adult. The court recognized Rivera's toxic influence, but did not ignore the seriousness of the act. It was an attempted murder, premeditated, carefully planned. In 2016, Roxana was sentenced to between 10 and 20 years in prison. Rivera, appointed as the mentor of the crime, received life imprisonment. And by all indications, he will never see sunlight outside the bars again. This case raises a question that bothers even today. When a minor commits a crime under strong manipulation, is he a criminal or a victim? The line between guilt and vulnerability can be tenuous. And we arrive at one of the most shocking cases on this list. T.J. Lane. What makes the T.J. Lane case so disturbing is that it was not motivated by bullying, revenge, or a sudden outburst. What he did, and how he reacted afterwards, made the world wonder, what happens when evil has no motive? On the morning of February 27, 2012, the routine of Chardon High School students in Ohio was interrupted by one of the most shocking attacks ever recorded in an American school. T.J. Lane, then 17, entered the cafeteria wearing a white shirt where he himself had written the word killer in dark letters. Without saying a word, he pulled a .22 caliber pistol and began shooting. In seconds, chaos set in. Students ran, hid, screamed. Some could not escape. 3 teenagers were killed: Daniel Parmenter, Demetrius Hewlin, and Russell King Jr. 3 others were injured. One was paralyzed from the waist down for life. TJ fled the school right after the attack, but did not go far. A teacher had the courage to chase him and alerted police. He was found inside a parked car less than 2 kilometers from the school. But if the attack was already shocking, what came later exceeded all expectations. During the trial, TJ showed no remorse, not for a second. While listening to the victims' families beg for justice, he smiled, made obscene gestures, laughed. He even said, looking into the eyes of one victim's parents, "The hand that took your son's life is now masturbating in hell." The courtroom went absolutely silent, not out of respect, but pure horror. TJ was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, without parole. Justice was done, at least on paper. But Lane's coldness was not confined to his sentence. In 2014, 2 years after the massacre, he managed to escape prison along with 2 other inmates. A 6-hour manhunt was launched until he was recaptured. The escape was short, but enough to rekindle fear. TJ was not just a juvenile killer. He was someone who seemed to feed on the very terror he caused. Today, TJ Lane serves his sentence in a maximum security prison, isolated from the world, but not from the memory of those who lived the horror in Chardon. His case is remembered as one of the coldest, most calculating and purposeless in juvenile criminal history. And perhaps the scariest part of all is knowing that, to this day, he has never apologized. What makes someone take a life? Most times, there is a reason: revenge, anger, or even despair. But what if the answer is just curiosity? The case of Alyssa Bustamante, the so-called Missouri thrill killer, is one of the most terrifying and inexplicable stories ever recorded in juvenile criminal history. It was an ordinary afternoon in St. Martin's, Missouri, on October 21, 2009, when little Elizabeth All, only 9 years old, disappeared. She was returning from a friend's house, but never arrived home. Her family, desperate, called police, and quickly, a search group was formed. But what seemed like a simple disappearance turned into an even deeper nightmare. The main suspect was Alyssa Bustamante, a 15-year-old teenager living in the neighborhood. At first, Alyssa showed concern and even helped in the search for the missing girl. But when police discovered Alyssa's diary, terror took over. There were, written with chilling detail, accounts of her own murders. "I just killed someone. I strangled them. I slit their throats. I stabbed them." It was an amazing feeling. Those words were not just a confession. They were a disturbing glimpse into the mind of a young girl who seemed to feed on her own violence. Investigators discovered that Alyssa had planned the crime with coldness. Days before the murder, she had already dug a shallow grave in the forest, waiting for her chance. And on the fateful night, when Elizabeth passed, Alyssa dragged her into the woods, where she executed the brutal attack. She strangled her, slit her throat and stabbed her, burying her body in the grave she had prepared. When asked about the crime, Alyssa showed no remorse. Her answer was chilling: "I was just curious. I wanted to know what it was like to kill someone." The girl had become something most of us could never imagine: a killer without motive, driven only by the desire to experience death. At trial, Alyssa pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 30 years. However, 30 more years were added to her sentence when she was charged with armed criminal action, meaning she can only leave prison at 60, in 2054. The case of Alyssa Bustamante remains one of the most shocking and incomprehensible examples of a murder without any justification, except for the disturbing desire to explore evil. Sometimes, the greatest threat does not come from where we expect. Sometimes, it is hidden behind a youthful face, in a mind that only wants to know what it is like to destroy. And if these cases shocked you, check out this video about the most feared child in prison. Thank you for watching, God bless you, and see you soon.